Okay, at a quick glance, here's everything you'll need to install the GRP Cold Air Intake. Got a nice thick pad for the bottom of the trunk. That'll help with knee fatigue, because you will be in and out of the vehicle quite a bit. A towel to put on the supercharger to protect your forearms and ribs. You'll be leaning on the supercharger quite a bit to kind of negotiate everything and get it in there. I used a magnet just to help get bolts out. I used a small file on the MAFS sensor, flathead screwdriver, a 5/16 nut driver for the new band clamps, T20 Torx to remove the MAFS sensor, 10mm wrench, a 3mm hex driver, an extension, 10mm nut, a work light, some clippers, and some extra zip ties. And then a step stool was definitely handy because I was in and out of the trunk more than I thought I would be. Okay, we're going to start the install by removing the negative terminal on the battery. So we're going to pop this cover off and get to the battery. Now that we have the cover off, we have access here to the negative battery terminal, and we are going to use a 10mm wrench and loosen that up right there and pop that off. All right, once that 10mm nut is loose, you can slide the terminal cable right off there, and you can set it to the side there, and I just made sure that I turned it and wedged it so that it doesn't accidentally fall back up against the neutral post there. Next, we're going to remove the panels around the engine bay just to gain a little extra access, give us room to work here. So these are on just rubber pops here on the edges, and so we're going to pop those up and out and set them to the side. All right, I got a little step stool to help us gain entry in and out of the trunk, and I put a thick protector down just to give me a little extra knee padding and kind of help with the fatigue here while we pull this intake in and out. A really useful tip is to get a towel and double it over and put it here on top of the supercharger, because your ribs and your forearms will thank you later for that. Okay, here's a shot from the top of the intake, and we're going to loosen up these. There's a flathead screw, or I'm going to use basically a quarter inch driver and pop these loose. And then we got the MAFS sensor here that we're going to remove and take out, and then we're going to find the mounting bolts up here around the airbox. This breather valve also needs to come off, so we can pull that there, pop this off, and we'll start removing it. All right, so this little plug here is the MAFS sensor, and we're gonna clip that zip tie there, and we're going to unplug this harness, and then we're gonna go around and find these 10mm bolts holding the air intake on and remove those. Something to be very careful of before you start removing the mounting bolts for the intake. There's the two 10mm at the top. This nut on the right side is welded on there, but this one on the left is not. So when you pull that bolt out, that nut will fall down. Now that we have that unplugged and out of the way, we're going to use a 10mm deep socket to get down to this mounting bolt, and there's another one hidden back in there. And I found that it helps to get to that one, just get an extension, and I've got an impact driver, and I'm just gonna zip that out. Okay, I've got the 10mm bolts on the air intake loose, but since we're working in the engine bay and we really don't want to drop anything down in there into Neverland, the bottom tray has like 30 bolts in it, so I really don't want to have to get down in there and fish anything out. I'm gonna just take some extra precautions and use a magnet, and I'm gonna pop these guys out just so they don't fall anywhere where I don't want them to be. Okay, now that we have the airbox free, we're going to start working out these tubes, hoses that are in the bottom, and basically you just want to squeeze them and pop them out of the holder on the bottom of the air intake. Once you get the hoses out of the holders on the bottom of the intake, there's also a red battery positive wire that is on the side there. You'll need to unhook that. That goes to the starter, it looks like. Anyways, you get those out of the bottom, and then this harness here where we unplug the MAFS sensor also runs with the coolant, so we will unplug this. And this harness is actually has some zip ties to the top of the air intake, so I'm going to pull that out a little bit to try to get access to that, but we'll also need to unplug this here on the coolant. Now that we have all that stuff unhooked, we can pull the airbox forward and get better access to this harness, and it looks like it's connected in 4 places along the top and the side with zip ties. So I'm just going to clip those off there and get this free so that we can go ahead and pull the whole intake out. In addition to the 4 zip ties around the top and the side of the airbox, there's actually one more on the bottom up under there that you'll have to get, and then really you just gotta slowly work and twist and rotate the airbox till you can get it to that position to get to that last zip tie. It's going to be easier to remove the entire airbox if you remove the lid first. So there's 3 T20 Torx bolts here on the top, and then we're going to pop this lid off, and then we'll be able to get the second half out. Alright, so I'm having a bit of a time getting the whole airbox out. So after I removed the 3 bolts, I've got the lid open, and there's basically just hangers on the bottom that once you get it turned sideways here, you can get that front lid off. Okay, here's a shot of the air intake box outside of the car, and I was going to show you this bottom hinge mechanism because I couldn't quite see it when it was in the car. So this might be easier to see what you have to do to get it loose, but it kind of just wedges into place there. So it was a little trickier in the car. It felt like it was stuck more than that, but that's how it works. Now we're going to remove this sensor and we're going to install it on the new intake. So this is also a T20 Torx screw, so we will unscrew that, pull that off, and install it on the new intake. Okay, I've got the mass air sensor out of the factory intake, and I'm about to put it in the new cold air intake. But I put it in there and it didn't seat all the way down. I don't know if you can notice right at the edges of that top shoulder by the orange gasket, it just flares out just a little bit wider than the rest of the sensor. So I'm going to take a bit of a file and just knock that edge off all the way around on the 4 sides. If you notice here, it's just a nice round edge. It's not as sharp, and so I'm going to just adjust that so it sits in there nice and flush. Being really careful not to get any contaminants or damage this sensor, I've taken a little flathead screwdriver and I'm lifting up that gasket. There is a direction that it needs to go on there, so be mindful of which way it's pointing in case you take it all the way off. But I'm going to just go right around the bottom and just clearance each corner so that it'll sit flush. Okay, we've got the sensor bolted up. This is a 3mm driver. So Allen driver there. And there is a little lock washer on each one of those. And this is the orientation that it will go. So air comes in this way, this goes through into the throttle body, and that's how it was set up on the factory airbox. So it's got the little code on top there and the numbers, part number on the bottom. So this is the correct orientation. Okay, we've got everything removed. We've got the bracket in place with the 10mm bolt, and we've got the hoses tucked up in the bracket. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna leave this loose for now. We can tighten that bolt at the end. And we're gonna make sure that this black OEM accordion piece is affixed there inside the side intake. And we're gonna use that. This new intake tube is gonna go down inside that accordion tube. Okay, once you get the intake fished down in there into the black accordion pipe, you get it seated inside the bracket. So basically put your hands on both sides, gently wiggle it till it sits down into the bracket, which is loose still. We've got the bolt in there, but it's just loose. Wiggle it into place, and then come around to the side, and you can reach into the intake, and you can feel if the accordion's still secure all the way around the inside of the intake, and then you can feel the silicone tubing from the new intake. Make sure that's all set in there nicely, and then you can go back and put it on the throttle body, tighten it down, and then go back into the intake and make sure that everything is still where you want it to be. All right, two really important pieces of information when installing this intake. On top of the air filter housing, there's a sticker, and that basically should be on the opposite side of a little drain hole, a water drain hole on the bottom. Check before you put that in to make sure that that's the case. Otherwise, when you install it, you want that drain hole to be on the very bottom. So you want to clock this housing to make sure that drain hole is on the bottom. And then the other important thing is this mass airflow sensor. You want it as 90 or as vertical as possible. So when you put the air intake housing in, make sure you clock this, get that up. All right, I learned a tip on installing this. Initially I was thinking put everything together and then snake it in there, which you do want the alignment that I showed you in the earlier video, but actually take this hose clamp off of here and put the canister in first. So take this whole section off, put the canister in, get it situated in the accordion pipe and in the bracket nice and deep. And then once you've got that situated and you've gone around the side intake and reached in there and felt that everything's seated and in place, then go ahead and slip this on, because this silicone hose tubing right here slips onto this housing really nice and easy. This aluminum piece here with the ridge is not easy. So it goes on the throttle body easy, and it goes on this really easy. So initially do your nice alignment on the table to get it close. Insert that into the accordion piece, the air canister, and then take this section and put it together, and then slowly work everything, and then start tightening up and double checking that everything fits properly. And here's how it looks with the engine bay all put back together. Now we'll hook the negative terminal back up, put the cover on, start it up, and drive it around.